Thank you, Tracy. And I'm so thrilled to be here to celebrate Productized's 10-year anniversary. And it's really special for me, this whole conference, but also being able to be here today and share with you a sneak preview of the second book that I'm working on. And it's really special for me to be able to share this with the Productized community in particular, because you guys inspired me to start working on this book. It was actually from last year's Productized conference. There was a question from just about there in the audience. Someone asked a question, and that led me to realize I have to work on this book. So this next book is going to be about why goals and OKRs don't work and what actually does. So you've heard me talk about this topic before, and I want to share with you just how much even my thinking has changed on this topic since I shared this with you last year at Productized. And you know by now, you know that I love examples from movies, and you know I'm going to challenge your thinking. So let's get ready. This is something that has bothered me for decades. Have you ever noticed how in the Star Wars movies, these stormtroopers, they seem to fire lots, right? There's lots of activity. But they never, ever seem to hit anything that matters. And in contrast, you have the Jedis. The Jedis, they set intent. They sense, learn, and adapt. And they seem to have this very disciplined approach. And it's a reflection-based approach, right? And what I found is, when you're creating change, whether it's through innovation or navigating change in the market, Jedis seem to do it a whole lot better than stormtroopers. In the corporate world, the stormtroopers are the ones who are chasing numbers and targets. And they chase these numbers and targets, and they even get some of these targets, but they never seem to actually hit what matters, right? They don't achieve all that much. And in contrast, you have the Jedis. They're a driven bunch, right? And they seem to take a disciplined approach, and then they have a much, much bigger impact than their size. But here's the thing. How do you build this Jedi discipline? How do you build this muscle for learning, adapting? And what I found, and this is the second thing that annoys me about these movies, this use the Force is not helpful. Have you noticed how, Luke Skywalker, they just tell him, use the Force. And with very little training, he seems to just know how to do this, right? He gets on these little planes, and then he's able to fight these battles. Use the Force is not helpful. And so this is where OHLs come in. I want to introduce you to this framework of OHLs, objectives, hypotheses, and learnings. And these help you take a disciplined approach to experimentation, learning, and adaptation. And it's through this mindset of puzzle setting and puzzle solving. Now, at this point, you could ask me, why puzzles? Because the thing is, in the corporate world, right, the idea of goal setting is so entrenched. We all talk about goals. This is what we've heard, that goals are what you need to build your business. Why puzzles? You never hear this terminology in the corporate world. And to answer this question, I want to try an experiment live with you, right? I'm going to ask you two questions, because I want you to experience the difference. I'll ask you two questions. Think about what feelings are triggered in you when I ask these questions, right? After each one, just think about your feelings. So here's the first question. What goals do you want to achieve for your company this year? What goals? Think about your feelings. And now here's the second question. What puzzles do you want to solve for your company this year? What puzzles? Do you feel the difference? So here's what I typically hear from people, right? When I ask this question about goals, and I've tried this live yesterday in my workshop, I've tried this live with podcast hosts, here's what I typically hear. goals, the feeling is this burdensome heaviness, that it feels overwhelming. Right? Ideas are based on, oh, what goals did I set the previous year? It's a memory recall thing. But most importantly, it's slightly fear-based. Like, oh, what numbers should I say because I'm going to be evaluated? And in contrast, in terms of puzzles, the first response I get is, oh, it triggered curiosity, excitement. In yesterday's workshop, people talked about, I felt like these are things I want to do. It comes from a place of internal drive. And overwhelmingly, it was, I like solving puzzles. How many of us felt this difference today? And don't be shy, raise your hands. So I want everyone to just look around, like hold your hands up, just look around you and see how many people find goals more motivating? Not many, right? And yet, even though puzzles are what drive us, this is not what we talk about in the corporate world. Isn't that interesting? So this is why we need this radical shift, this mindset shift from thinking about goals, which aren't that motivating, to finding that internal drive with puzzles. And this is why I want to introduce us to OHLs, objectives, hypotheses, and learnings. And that sounds dry. What I really mean is that we're going to set puzzles using objectives, and then we're going to solve these puzzles using hypotheses and learnings. So, to give you the difference between how stormtroopers and Jedis create change and how you can use this puzzle setting and puzzle solving, I want to give you the example of Marvel versus A24. Now, a couple of years ago, I talked about Marvel. Right? At the time, Marvel was in their Jedi phase. And Marvel innovated. They created the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That was an innovation. And by being in this Jedi phase, right, and innovating, they created 10 of the top 30 highest grossing movies of all time. But here's the thing. What has happened since then? At the time, 2 years ago, I used them as a good example. But what has happened since? Well, now Marvel is in their stormtrooper phase. And so what happens? They keep chasing numbers. And all we're seeing is repetition, and it's showing in their box office returns. Let's look at what they put out, right? Those The Eternals. God, that movie sucked. Then there was Quantumania, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Then there was Guardians of the Galaxy. Not one, not two, but three. The Marvels. That was a huge box office flop. And then there was Captain America. I've lost count of how many there were. New York Times wrote a scathing review saying, we've seen this movie 32 times before. So, let's look at the contrast. A24, what did they do? They had the Jedi discipline of setting intent, sensing, learning, adapting, and they took a puzzle setting and puzzle solving approach. So let me illustrate this puzzle setting approach with objectives using OHLs. And for those of you who don't know who A24 is, you'll discover that very soon. What was the problem statement that A24 was trying to solve? They said movies are increasingly just franchises. If anyone is a creative, bold filmmaker, they don't have a place to go to for funding and distributing such a movie. Creativity is dying. And so what were some guiding questions? The first question was, these guys were just starting out. Why would talented filmmakers work with us? Even if we're willing to invest in them, why would they work with us? We're nobodies. They don't know us. Then there's the second question. Can we even build a brand around creativity? And finally, and this is the big question, can we make indie movies successful? I mean, they're notoriously not successful financially, right? And so the puzzle is, How do we acquire and distribute artsy movies so they can be financially successful? So this was the puzzle they set out with. So what did they do? Now let's look at how they structured hypotheses and learnings into puzzle solving. And the way you do that in this OHL's framework is by asking 3 questions. The first question is, how well did it work? This is your first attempt at solving the puzzle, right? You try your first attempt at a Rubik's Cube, and you figure out, how well did that work? Then the second question. This is where I say to teams, don't just spit out numbers. Tell me what you learned. Numbers are important, but so is the story. What did you learn? And then finally, the third question. What will we try next? This is where I say, imagine I gave you a magic wand. What would you ask for? So let's look at what they did. A24 was starting out in 2012. And when they were talking to filmmakers, the first couple of filmmakers, they didn't even respond to them, right? And they realized, just we're not getting anyone's attention. And they saw Spring Breakers at a film festival, and they said, we have to acquire Spring Breakers. So here was their hypothesis. They said, we can acquire movies if filmmakers can truly see our passion. So what did they try? One guy from A24, he flew over to go see the director. And he brought with him a custom gift basket. What was this custom gift basket? They made a gun-shaped glass bong. They made a glass bong, and they engraved it with Spring Breakers. And this guy was carrying this through airport security, where everyone was asking him, what is wrong with you? But they acquired the movie. What did the distributor say? What did the director say? This was the quote from the director. Hollywood is run by accountants at this point. And so to find a distributor who's truly passionate about artsy projects, someone who has heart, we want to work with them. So this is what they learned in terms of acquisition, that yes, they can acquire interesting movies. And so they did. They started acquiring a lot of interesting movies. What did they learn next? Okay, so in 2014, they released Under the Skin, featuring Scarlett Johansson. How many of us heard of Under the Skin? Anyone? Yes. Okay, a few of you, okay. Then, in 2015, came Ex Machina. How many of you heard of Ex Machina? Okay, a lot more of us. Why is that? This was part of their learning. What did they discover? They realized that we can't just acquire movies. When we market them, when we distribute them, we have to make every movie an event. You know how they made Ex Machina an event? They created a bot on Tinder. Long before AI was a big thing, right? This was back in 2015. They created a Tinder bot. And so if you swiped right on this Tinder bot, then it took you to Ex Machina's Instagram page. It was a viral hit. This is what they learned. They have to make every movie an event and be really creative about marketing. And so, what would they try next? They knew now how to acquire movies and how to market them, and they realized we are going to create interesting, artsy movies, and we want to work with filmmakers who want to tell a deeply personal story. And this is how they've had huge successes, including Moonlight in 2017 that won an Oscar, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Right? Now you know who A24 is. If you didn't recognize the name before, it's the studio behind Everything Everywhere All at Once. And this is how A24, by taking a Jedi approach, without chasing numbers, they've had a huge success, huge financial success with indie movies. Isn't that crazy? They're now a $3.5 billion company. They were the first studio to sweep all the major Oscars when Everything Everywhere All at Once won that Oscar, right? And now they have 21 Oscars to their name, all without chasing numbers. So the lesson from this is, to innovate and grow a company, what we really need is Jedi discipline, not stormtrooperism. But especially in the age of AI, what we need is this Jedi discipline. There's just less of a need for stormtroopers. Why do I say that? It's because stormtroopers, right, they've always been easily replaceable. Always. I mean, you can't tell one stormtrooper from the next. But in the AI era, AI is like a super duper stormtrooper that can optimize a whole lot better than you or I ever can. And so, until now, if you are feeling like, you know what, it's okay to be a stormtrooper because my company appreciates my optimizing metrics, well, in the age of AI, it begs a question. Why do we need PMs when I can use AI to do this optimization? And if you're a leader, you're still not immune to this, by the way, because the next question is, why do I need a chief product officer when all my remaining PMs, I can have them report to the CTO? Because after all, it's the tech that's optimizing numbers. And so in the age of AI, it begs the question, what is your value add when AI can be the super stormtrooper and a whole lot better at optimization? Your differentiation over AI is your ability to experiment, to sense, learn, and adapt. Don't abdicate this to AI. I don't mean to dismiss AI, right? AI is really powerful, and it can be a really good ally when you want to build products to create the change you want much faster. So whether it's by creating content, creating UI, vibe coding, it can help you create change faster. But the risk we run is without Jedi discipline, we risk creating a whole bunch of AI product slop. What do I mean by AI product slop? How many of us recognize content created by AI and have this gag reflex, right? Exactly. AI product slop, the way I define it, is it's the quickly released mediocrity that is optimized for short-term metrics, but it creates long-term fatigue in our users, and it creates unintended consequences for society. This is AI product slop. So let me give you an example of how we can generate AI product slop. And I want to give you an example by starting with stuff that we did short-term without even AI, right? So the example I'm about to give you, we did it without AI. We ruined the dating scene without AI. But now imagine that we could just fast forward this process using AI. So what happened? In 2013, Tinder came out with the swipe left and swipe right functionality, right? Remember that? Huge hit. Why? Because in the short term, it was optimizing a really important metric, user engagement. They launched swipe left, swipe right, user engagement skyrocketed. So everyone said, ooh, that sounds good. So they copied the swipe left, swipe right. Everyone now has some form of swipe left, swipe right. And so everyone's user engagement metrics in the short term were fantastic. But what happened? It turned out that the more we gamified intimacy, the more we were creating a toxic dating environment because we were dehumanizing interactions, right? And so people started feeling this dating fatigue. There was backlash. People started deleting dating apps, right? And the entire dating industry was in a slump. In fact, just this year, Bumble announced that they're laying off 30% of all of its staff. We optimize for metrics in the short term, but we kill the industry longer term. And this is the risk. AI can do this much faster. We can deteriorate things much faster by chasing numbers. And so what can save us from this AI product slop is your Jedi discipline. Remember from Star Wars, you're our last hope? This is why we need your Jedi discipline. So how would Jedis think about this puzzle? So the problem statement would be, dating feels dehumanizing and toxic. Right? People are quitting dating apps. They're feeling burnt out. And so guiding questions would be, how can we make dating interactions just less dehumanizing? How can we reduce FOMO for people? How can we make it less overwhelming? And so the puzzle would be, how can we address these issues so that dating is a better experience for people? Right? This would be the puzzle, instead of just optimizing for user engagement. So, at this point, you'd be fair to ask, okay, I'm liking this puzzle setting and puzzle solving. This sounds really nice, but you know what? My CEO, my shareholders, they need to see real numbers. Have you used this approach to create better business results? And the answer is yes, overwhelmingly. And the example that I want to share with you is that of Signal Ocean. So Signal is a maritime company. The best way to describe it is they're a data analytics platform for the maritime industry so that they can help you figure out what is the best vessel to match to which cargo. Now, in 2023, the CEO brought me into Signal because sales had stalled at the time. The company had done really well in the oil tanker business, but they had started to get into the dry bulk market, and sales had stalled. Usage had stalled. And so he had introduced OKRs before I joined, like long before I joined. And that was because he had realized, from all of the marketing around OKRs, that is how you drive growth, right? That's what we've learned. And so they had OKRs exactly as prescribed. It was key results about sales targets, various usage metrics, growth, etc. And when I joined, when I talked to the team, how's the product doing? The team had learned to really speak in stats. So I would get lots of numbers in terms of how the product was doing, lots of stats. But here's the thing, despite whatever stats I was hearing, right, whatever growth numbers, it wasn't changing reality. Sales and usage had still stalled. And my realization was we were mostly focused on just the left brain. It was a very analytical way of thinking. So what did we do? We started to apply this puzzle setting approach. We started thinking about it as a puzzle. So here's the problem statement. It turned out that most of our users, they were tech-savvy brokers. Tech-savvy brokers. And it turned out that we just hadn't addressed a group that was wider than this. These were our early adopters, and that was it. And so here are some guiding questions that we genuinely did not know the answers to. So the first question was, so if we look at the others, the tech-averse people who are in other roles in the industry, why aren't they using our product? What do they need? Are we even meeting their needs? We didn't know. And so the puzzle was, how do we grow the business by expanding to these tech-averse users in other industries? So this was the puzzle. So great, now that we'd set the puzzle, it was time to start solving the puzzle. And it triggered this creative network, right? The right brain, as we would call it. And so in solving the puzzle, we asked those three questions. How well did it work? This was our first attempt at the puzzle, right? We thought, okay, so if we want to address the tech-averse users, right, let's just automate as much as we can so that it's a whole lot simpler for these tech-averse users. Fair, right? So that was our hypothesis. How well did it work? Not at all. Not at all. Why didn't it work? What did we learn from this? When we talked to our users, the tech-averse people, what we realized was, Well, Signal's technology was brilliantly accurate, and it felt like magic. But here's the problem. It turns out tech-averse people don't like magic. They don't trust the technology, so they don't like magic. Their question was, wait a minute, how did you get these numbers? Right? How can I trust them? And so what would we try next? Right? What if we had a magic wand? We weren't just optimizing our features. We realized that we need to give them control. We need to guide them at every step so that they know what they're going to get. They can predict what's going to happen. Right? We needed to give them that sense of control. So this was the left brain and right brain working together, hypotheses and learnings, the stories. And now you can imagine that we applied this mindset across every element of our product. Right? We started having what I call now learning meetings. We call them learning meetings because every product manager was talking about their features with these three questions. How well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next? And as we got comfortable with these learning meetings and presenting information in this way, talking about and thinking about information in this way, we started using this in other places. In monthly business reviews. So instead of presenting OKRs as green, red, or yellow, right, we started sharing how well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next? And we had much more insightful conversations within the company by talking through these three questions. Even in design sprints, at the end of every day, we would talk about puzzles and what we were learning about these puzzles and what we would try the next day, because every user interview was precious in B2B, right? And so what had we learned? What would we try next? And by taking this approach, by taking this puzzle-solving approach, we delivered better business results than OKRs ever did. Remember I had said sales had stalled in 2023? Well, we doubled sales in 2024 and again in 2025, and we've reduced churn from 26% to 4%. And it was super satisfying for me to hear from the CEO, how he described OHLs. And I loved this visual. He said, OHLs, they give you ears on the ground. They make measurement a lot more actionable. And in contrast, he talked about OKRs as this view from the rearview mirror, that you either hit targets or you don't, but measurement is not actionable. I found this really rewarding because he had brought in OKRs, right? But I guess what's the most rewarding for me is working with a team. Because working with Jedis is so much more fun and they're so much more driven than stormtroopers can ever be. This was at the end of our last design sprint just in September. And you can see we were exhausted and so happy all at the same time. So the big question for you is, who do you want to be? The stormtrooper who is dispensable, the replaceable extra, and who leaves no mark, or the Jedi who's invaluable, who is the protagonist, creating change, and who leaves a legacy? The thing I've realized is, you have this choice even in your personal life. Stormtroopers, we're often guided to be stormtroopers by society, right? We're guided to pursue job titles, the fancy car, followers on LinkedIn, etc., right? But we could be Jedis. And I'm often asked, who's my role model? And I want to share with you this Jedi, Kate Beatty. So Kate Beatty is 86 now. And she doesn't know I'm talking about her at this conference. But the way I got to know her was during my undergrad days at MIT. So Kate Beatty, her role there was she was the coordinator of the Host to International Students program. And her title doesn't even begin to describe the impact that she's had. Right? When she had her retirement party, people traveled long distances to come to her retirement party. And when they talked about the impact that she had had on their lives, so many people cried. So here's my own story. So, when I was in my first year at MIT, I would often walk by her office on my way to classes or something. And if I saw her door open, I'd walk in and I'd tell her, oh, I just wanted to say hi. And she'd always invite me in, and she would ask me how I'm doing. And the thing is, right, at some point, I noticed that she used to send emails at 2 in the morning. And I asked her once, wow, so you're busy, you're really busy. How come you never tell me, come back later, or that, now is not a good time? And this is where I realized what a Jedi Master she is. Because she had learned that it turns out when students come to you and they just want to say hi, that's when they actually reveal what's happening in their lives. She shared how, sometimes she learned about students who are really depressed, or, in one case, there was a student whose parent had died. But she realized, and being the Jedi, she was sensing, learning, and adapting. And in my own case, I remember I was in my first year at MIT. This was in December. I was really depressed because it was my first year away from home. I was 3,000 miles from home. The campus was emptying, right? Christmas was approaching. There was all these TV ads about family and being together. I was miserable. And Kate Beatty offered me a shoulder to cry on. And she also told me, actually, MIT offered, at the time, 1 free round-trip ticket back home. And that was the time when I really needed it. And you can see that, even until just 2 years ago, she was still hosting these holiday parties for these international kids. And even though we were grown up, we still went to those. So always 2 there are, the Jedi Master and the apprentice, right? And this is my Jedi Master for the kind of legacy that she has created. And it's not about job titles and what role you hold. And so with that, I want to remind you that you have a choice every day in your work, in your personal life, to be either the stormtrooper, right, who's chasing numbers but who doesn't achieve much, or the Jedi who leaves a legacy by experimenting, learning, and adapting. And now you finally have the recipe for how you can be that Jedi. And it's not by using the Force, thank goodness. You now have a clear framework for puzzle setting and puzzle solving. And you can build this discipline of experimentation, learning, and adaptation. And the way you can use OHLs is, even if in your company you're using OKRs, you can still use this approach to set and solve puzzles. And the way you can do that is by defining the puzzles using objectives, and then solving those puzzles by structuring your hypotheses and learnings into the 3 questions. How well is it working? What have we learned? And what will we try next? And by taking this approach, you can build the Jedi discipline, and it doesn't carry all the burden and the work of OKRs. And so, if you guys want to take that picture of the summary, this is really the summary of all of what you need. This is the recipe, right? But you can also get the OHL's toolkit. And the way you can get that is from the Radical Product Thinking website. Just go to Toolkits, and then you'll find the OHL's toolkit. So that's a free download that you can get. And I'm working on the 2nd book. So I would love to hear your stories and your experience with OHLs. And if you share with me your story, it might just make it into the book as a case study. And lastly, until then, get the Radical Product Thinking book. You can ask me about corporate workshops. You can get the free toolkit for Radical Product Thinking as well. And lastly, you can also message me on LinkedIn. I always love to hear how you're creating change. So please feel free to connect and find me at the conference. Thank you.